Hello, bonjour, bonsoir. It's Mary Schiller of maryschiller.com, also known as Mary in Paris. And I want to welcome you to the 1 hour mini book method live demonstration. I am very excited to be here with you and to show you a bit about how the 1 hour mini book method works. If you are joining me live, feel free to say hello in the chat. I will be taking your questions at a certain point in the presentation, but you can always type something in the chat and I will be on the lookout for your comments. If you're watching this on the replay, as always, I appreciate you taking the time to do so. And I promise to make this next 45 to 60 minutes extremely valuable to you. So again, welcome. By way of introduction, in case you are new to me, I have been a coach for the past 10 years, but I have also been a professional writer, editor, ghostwriter for more than 30 years, which is crazy for me to think about. It's amazing that it's been that long. It's been an amazing career and I have enjoyed every single minute of it. And I have written just about everything you can think of in that 30 plus years. I have been a journalist. I've been a marketing copywriter. I've been a ghostwriter. I've written television commercials, radio commercials. Remember radio? I've written corporate videos, corporate communications. As a ghostwriter, I've written everything from articles about extremely high level technical subjects all the way to architecture and someone's biography. So it's really been an incredible experience in terms of all of the things that I have learned along the way. I didn't start writing and self-publishing my own books until 2011, 2012. I can't remember exactly when I wrote and self-published my memoir. And then a few years later in 2016 was when I wrote and self-published my first mini book. And I'm starting with this because I want you to get right away the power of a short book. And it's kind of interesting because recently I was talking with my best friend about nonfiction books, particularly books that may have sort of a self-help tone or something along those lines. And she was saying, in a lot of those books, I get about halfway through and I realize they're just repeating themselves over and over again. And so I actually prefer a short book that's concise. And I was like, yes, I do too, because I don't want to hear the same thing repeated over and over again. And I don't think you do either. So the first book that I wrote that was very short, it was only 6,000 words, which is, I don't even know how many pages that is, maybe 40 pages. It was called The Joy Formula. It's still available on Amazon. I'll probably never take it down because I love that book so much. And that book came about because at the time, I was not a coach yet. I was still working for actually a ghostwriting company. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And I was running a free Facebook group that had, I don't know, maybe 20 people in it for friends and family. And it was about life transformation because a couple of years earlier, I'd gone through a major transformation in my own life. And I wanted to tell people how I brought that about. So the people in that group said, Mary, you're a writer. Can you put something together that explains this kind of transformation, this particular way of seeing things in a way that's really accessible that we could give to other people? And I thought, yeah, I can do that. So I wrote The Joy Formula, and originally I gave it away for free on my blog at the time to anyone who subscribed to my blog. At the time, I was doing a daily audio blog called The Daily Principles. And so I was just giving this book away. And then one of my lovely subscribers came to me and said, Mary, I would love for you to make some money from this book because it's really good. Why don't you put it on Amazon? Well, I had self-published my memoir before that, but I had made a mistake. This is something I want you to hear, which is I had hired a firm to do that for me. And when I hired that firm to put that online for me, I lost control of my book, meaning I couldn't update it. I couldn't do anything. I had to literally unpublish it in order to take back control. Well, I wasn't going to do that this time. I had since taken control of my own memoir and put it on Amazon myself. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to try it with this book and see what happens. And so I did. It was a little bit of a lengthy process because some things had changed. And also, I made a paperback version, which I had never done before. That was a whole other thing. But I got it up on Amazon. And what was so amazing about that short book is that it was one of the two things that I would say was most responsible for allowing me to start my coaching business and succeed very rapidly. And the reason is because you can tell me in the chat, why do you think the joy formula was so instrumental in my being able to start my life coaching business and get clients right away? Yes, I had had a little exposure elsewhere, but not a lot. I had an email list of about, I don't know, 150 people maybe who had signed up for my audio blog. I had that little Facebook group. But the reason was because people saw me as credible. And they read that book. They knew that I knew what I was talking about. It made me an authority in their eyes. And for that reason, they were willing to come on to a discovery call and see if I was the right coach for them and vice versa. So ever since then, I've realized the power of a short book, a mini book, as I've started to call them, cannot be underestimated. People think that when you're going to write a book or become an author, you have to write this 250, 300 page book in order to be taken seriously. That is just not true. If anything, it's the opposite. Because as I said a moment ago, a lot of people who, especially who aren't professional writers, have trouble filling that many pages. I think I would have trouble filling that many pages if I tried to expand, let's say, on the joy formula into a larger book. I honestly don't think I could do it. And my goal, this is really ambitious, but I want you to hear this, is to make at least 1,000 experts authors. I want to turn 1,000 experts, particularly solopreneurs, because solopreneurs are my favorite type of person to work with, into authors. Now, I can't do that myself as a ghostwriter. And for most people who aren't writers, it's very difficult to even imagine how they would sit down and create a book. And that is why I have developed what I've called the 1 hour mini book method. Let me just check my notes. If you have any comments or you want to say hello, please do so in the chat. Let's talk for a moment about the typical ways that a non-professional writer would go about writing a book. There's really only two ways that I can see. If there's something I'm missing, please tell me. The first is that you sit down in front of a blank page and you try to write the book yourself. If you're here live, let me know if you have tried to do that. Have you tried to sit down in front of Word or a Google Doc or something, and you've tried to write your book? You've tried to come up with a topic. You've tried to come up with an outline. You've tried doing some drafting, because a lot of people tell me that they get stuck even before they start. They're not sure what the topic should be. I will talk about that and how to figure out your topic in just a moment. They don't know how to organize their thoughts. They feel overwhelmed because, again, they think they have to put every single thing they know into this one book, because if this is going to be the book, it's got to be the book with everything in it from A to Z. Whereas with a mini book, you can write several mini books or a series of mini books all around a topic instead of taking it all on in this big project. So a lot of people get stuck just in front of the blank screen. The other way to get a book written is to hire a ghostwriter. This is a great way to go if you have the budget for it. And I actually just looked up my previous company that I worked for right before I became a coach to see how much they were charging for a ghostwriter. And I was shocked to see that this was their lowest priced offer. Okay. Their lowest priced offer included things like cover design and some initial help with marketing your book. Okay. So that was included. But you know what it didn't include? It didn't even include ghostwriting. It included you working with a book coach. And the price of that was $44,000. $44,000. They are talking about what they would call a full length nonfiction book, so larger than a mini book. But I just thought to myself, what solopreneur is going to have that kind of budget and that kind of time, frankly, to spend working with a writing coach? I don't even remember now what the fees were after that. I mean, I can't even imagine. I know when I worked at this company, they were quite expensive back then as well. And the full ghostwriting package at that time was something like 50 grand. So I would imagine it's probably closer to 70,000. I'd have to look it up again. But I was honestly really taken aback by that. And I thought, there's got to be another way. And so I set out a while back now to figure out how I could make it possible for a solopreneur who is not a professional writer to create a mini book. And what eventually emerged is the 1 hour mini book method. I'm going to start this next piece by saying that I know there's a lot of controversy right now, at least around using AI in writing. I totally get where people are coming from, and I don't want to dismiss those concerns because they are real. I understand. I also know that when I first came across ChatGPT, which I think is probably about 2 years ago now, sometime in 2024, early 2024, I was very skeptical of how it could benefit me because I kept thinking, well, I'm a professional writer. I write really fast. I don't need a tool like this. So how could this possibly help me? And then I worked and worked and worked. And when I say worked with the tool, I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours working with ChatGPT to try to understand how I could make it create something that still sounded like the person's voice who was using it, so that it didn't sound like AI, or as the term now is AI slop. I hate that term, but you all know what I'm talking about. That was the last thing that I wanted to create for myself, certainly. And I didn't want to try to create something for someone else that sounded like AI. So I spent countless hours figuring out how to train the tool to take someone's voice and produce something that sounded like that person. So that was my aim, was how can I make this sound like the person's voice? Well, what came to me was that I guess I need to start literally with the person's voice. So I experimented on my own voice. I started uploading transcripts of talks that I had given into, ChatGPT to see if that would train the tool to sound more like me in whatever it produced after that. And lo and behold, it actually started to work. I started playing with different prompts and I sort of pushed back if I felt like it wasn't really capturing what I wanted it to capture. And before too long, I was starting to see some really amazing results. So I thought to myself, gosh, could this really help people to write their own books? I think that it could. So what did I do? I'll give you one guess. I wrote a book called The 1 Hour Mini Book Method. I'm just going to show you a picture of it so you can see what it looks like. It's available on Amazon worldwide. And I thought, this will be a great test to see if I can make this work myself and if it can create a short book that is really useful. And I have had people write to me and tell me they've gone through the process outlined in this book and it has gotten them a good manuscript to work with, which has been incredibly rewarding to hear. And this is why I believe in the power of short books, because they can give you credibility and they can actually produce results and transformation in people's lives. So it's not just that it's good for your business because it brings in new client work for you. That's a big part of it, but it also can help people who aren't necessarily interested in hiring you. You can just have your book out there doing your beautiful work on your behalf. I was calculating the other day about how much money I've earned from my mini books being out there on Amazon. And I would say a conservative estimate would be around $300,000 to $400,000 in client fees over the years. That's a conservative estimate because I have had people tell me that they found me through my books, that they've read them all. That's what made them want to get in touch with me and made them want to work with me. And so I have not made that much in sales, but I don't care about sales. I care about having more reach for people who need help and don't want to pay for a coach or a consultant. And I also love books because they put us in front of people and give them a sense of who we are way before they ever contact us directly. Does that number surprise you? Tell me in the chat that income figure, because that is a fact. That is not a made up number. When I looked back at my 10 years of earnings, that's what it looks like to me. So a small book, a short book of between 8,000 and 15,000 words, although the Joy Formula was only 6,000. So I guess we could say 6,000 to say 15,000 at the very most, can have a huge effect on other people and on your own business and your own life. One of the things that I hear most often is, how do I choose a topic for my book? Many people say that they can't narrow it down. They say they wouldn't know where to start. They say they're not sure what would represent them well. So if that's a concern that you have, know that I've heard that from a lot of people. So here are some suggestions for how you can figure out what your mini book could be about. And the most obvious one is a topic that you've already delivered a training or a talk on in the past. So for instance, if you have given a talk on a specific topic and you have the recording, because that's a big piece of the 1 hour mini book method, I'll show you in a moment. That is great. Start with that, especially and importantly, if it relates to what your actual offer is. So when I released the Joy Formula on Amazon, I was doing life coaching and it directly related to what I was talking about in the Joy Formula. So I knew that if someone found me through that book and they wanted to talk to me as a potential coach, there wouldn't be any surprises. They would know exactly what I was about. So that's my first suggestion, Laura, and everyone, is, have you already delivered a training or some kind of talk that you have the recording of, on a specific topic that relates to what you're offering as a solopreneur? That is really important. The two things need to tie together. If that's not the case, then what is something that you love to talk about related to what you offer? Something that you could just talk about off the cuff without even thinking that much about it. Like, you wouldn't have to have a whole page of notes or anything like that. You could come up with 3 big bullet points, and then you could talk about that for, say, 60 to 75 minutes. And it relates directly to what you do with people. That will make a great topic for your book. Again, we're talking about a mini book. We're not talking about a book that's going to cover the entirety of a topic. If you look up the rest of my mini books on Amazon, you'll see that they are very, very specific. For example, the 1 hour mini book method describes this method in detail. It goes through the entire step-by-step process. The other book that I've written in this series so far is called Money from Mini Books. That talks about how you can build a coaching business around a single book. Another one I published recently was called It's Not Too Late to Want Everything. That is a book about, especially for women, about not seeing time or age as standing in your way, that you can still want what you want and go after it. So I'm not trying to tackle everything in a small book. I'm tackling one specific idea, and I'm bringing that idea to life in a way that is very powerful in a short form. You know what they say about good things coming in small packages? Well, that's what mini books definitely are. So those are two ways. I have a third way. The first is something you've already done a training on and you have the recording for it, or something that you could talk about for 60 to 90 minutes that is related to your business and is something that comes very naturally to you, that you don't really have to think about too much. Another thing to consider is if there is a topic that you know would be a great foundation for your business. So when I think back to the joy formula, I wasn't doing this consciously at the time, but I can see that it ended up being this way. Is that book and the follow-up one that I wrote called Mind Yoga, both of those were very foundational to my business. And they were things that I was able to build my business off of. So I did coaching in the very thing that I was talking about in those two books. I offered other programs that related exactly to what I was doing in those two books. So that's a third thing, is what is a topic that would form a beautiful foundation for what you do in your business. Because of course, that's where it all starts. And the mini book method, the 1 hour mini book method the name comes from having a 60-minute minimum recording of yourself speaking on the topic for your book. And that is the whole key to this process, because as I said a few minutes ago, the way to use these AI tools like Claude or ChatGPT is to feed it your own voice. And I prefer to use a transcript of the spoken voice because it sounds the most natural. Most people, when they sit down to write something, think they have to sound like a writer. So they tend to write in a way that doesn't sound very natural or conversational. Whereas if you start this process with a transcript of something that you have said, it will sound more conversational. It will sound more like you. Now, many years ago, when I was doing ghostwriting for people, the way that I would capture their voice was by interviewing them. I would start with an outline that was produced either with me or with someone else on the team. Often it was someone else on the team. And then we would come up with questions for each chapter that I needed to ask the author. And then I would spend literally hours on the phone or Zoom or whatever we were using at the time and record their responses to questions. So this was a very challenging process, because then after I would spend all of that time interviewing and getting their voice recorded, I would go through a transcript. At the time we were using rev.com. I think they're still in existence, to get the transcript. And then I was having to use all of my writing and editing skills at a very high level to capture that person's voice and not lose things. I remember one person whose book I was working on was from the South, and he had very distinctive ways of saying certain things. And I had to remember that that was his distinctive voice, and I had to keep all of that in there, at least a certain amount anyway, and not override it with my own. Well, now we have the ability with something like ChatGPT to do something like that, except not that labor intensive. That's why these ghostwriting companies charge so much, because the time spent working on projects like this is enormous, and it's just a very high level skill that takes an enormous amount of time. Let me know if that is making sense. Let me go back here. Laura says, I don't think I could speak for 60 minutes on any topic. Would it work with notes and snippets of ideas? That's a great question. And I'm going to challenge you on that, Laura, and anyone who is watching who thinks you can't speak for 60 minutes. First of all, you can, because you know way more than you could ever cover in one 60-minute talk. You can, of course, if you were doing this following the 1-hour mini book method, you could break it up into segments. So you could have a topic, an overall topic, break it into 3 or 4 different pieces and talk for 10 to 15 minutes and end up with a 60-minute recording. 60 minutes is really the minimum that I have found that works for these mini books. That's why I say 1 hour, because that really is the minimum. It also depends on how fast you're speaking, because you may be a quick speaker and have more words that show up. I think in 1 hour, it's usually around 9,000 words that get spoken. So that's not a bad start for something. Obviously, some of that won't be usable and you'll need to include some extra things. I'll talk about that in just a moment when I do the demo, but you certainly can. Don't doubt yourself there. You could talk for days if you wanted to on specific topics. So I'm going to challenge you on that and ask you to rethink that, because I know everyone here and everyone watching this has so much experience and expertise that a 1 hour talk you could do with your eyes closed if you really thought about what the topic would be. All right. So what is this process? I'm going to demonstrate this for you in just a second. I will explain each step. And by the end of this demonstration, I will have a working outline for a book based on a talk that I've given. I'm going to just go over really quickly what the basic steps are, and then I'll start the process. So the very first thing, as I said, is to have a recording of yourself that's 60 to 90 minutes long. And then you will need to get a transcript of that. Now, I use a tool called Descript for this purpose. I'm going to just put my full disclosure. This is my affiliate link. I'm going to put in the chat there. I've used Descript for years for video and audio editing, and it's a very simple way to get a transcript. Basically, the way that it works is you just upload the video or audio into Descript, and very quickly, whatever you have said shows up on the screen like a Word document. I'm going to show you an example of that right now. Okay, so I uploaded a video, which was a recording of a talk I gave a couple of years ago called Achieve More in Less Time. It was actually 2 parts. And so when I uploaded the video, what Descript did was it gave me this transcript of what I said. Then I clicked export transcript, export, and then it downloaded to my computer. It's literally that simple, and it takes very little time. For a 60-minute talk like this, it maybe takes 2 minutes at most to get all of this to show up on the screen. It's quite incredible. So that is the simple tool that I use. It saved me a ton of time, and in my mind, it's not a very expensive tool for what you get for it. There are other ways to get transcripts, but that is the one that I recommend and use myself. So what happens then after we have this transcript? Well, now we need to start working with ChatGPT, and we need to ask ChatGPT to start helping us take this transcript and turn it into an outline. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and show you exactly how I do that. So I am in ChatGPT, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add photos and files, and I'm going to add the 2 transcripts. This talk, like I said, was in 2 parts. And I'm going to say the first thing I like to do sometimes, not all the time, but I'll say, I'm attaching the transcript of a 2-part talk I gave. Can you analyze this for me and tell me if you think it would make a good mini book of between 8,000 and I'm just going to say 12,000 words? What theme or themes do you think would work? Okay, and then I'm just going to click that and it's going to do its thing. Okay, it's saying based only on these transcripts, I think this could make a very good mini book. In fact, I think it has the qualities I always look for in a strong mini book. You know how these things are, they're very complimentary. The strongest theme. This book is not really about time management. That's what people think they're getting. What they're actually getting is a shift in how they think about their lives. The real message is something like, you don't need more time. You need permission to spend your life on what matters most. That's much stronger. And so then I'm going to keep going. I hear 3 possible books: permission to spend your life well, or you don't need more time. More progress in less time stays close to the workshop title. How to accomplish what matters most by changing what deserves your attention. Very practical. The first one is more like a personal development book. Option 3, the 4s and 5s method. That is based on an exercise that I had people do. It could become a signature idea. The strongest concepts I found: the myth that you need more time. Everyone believes they have a time problem. Most actually have a priority problem. So it's giving me all of these ideas for a book already based on what I uploaded. Now, I should say that these particular transcripts, the first one was the talk. The second one was almost all Q&A, but I just put them both in there just to see if there was something it might pull out from the Q&A. But if I only had the first one that was a 60-minute talk, that would have worked just as well. So before I keep going with this demonstration, what are you seeing from just that piece of this process? Because I can tell you what I'm seeing. I'd love to hear in the chat, if you're with me live, what you're noticing there. Because what often happens is that when we are looking at our own work, when we are listening to ourselves and we don't have anything or anyone out there objectively listening, it's very hard to see our own value. It's hard to see our own ideas plainly like this. So, of course, I thought the talk or the training was a good idea, or I wouldn't have hosted it. But sometimes you will give a talk or you'll make a video or even you'll write something and you'll look at it later and you'll go, oh my gosh, I don't remember saying that. That was actually kind of genius. That is really great. You know, it's so hard to see and hear ourselves objectively. And so that is one of the things that I have learned to appreciate about these tools, is that when I am giving it my information and it is telling me back, you know, here are the different ways that you could potentially use this, I'm finding that very helpful. It, for me, has opened my mind to some other ways that I can use my own voice, other ways that I can say things. In the past, when I did this, I can remember one specific book that I wrote. I've written a few from talks that I've given even before AI existed in this form. But I remember one of the books that I wrote was called To Love is to Listen. And that was based on a talk that I gave called What Saved My Marriage. And looking back, I probably should have stuck with the same title because it's a lot more grabby than the title I gave it. I've thought about actually taking that book down and redoing it and republishing it with that title because it's actually a really great book, if I do say so myself. But I remember at the time just thinking, oh gosh, I don't think I'm qualified to say this, or I don't think it's really working like that. If I had had a tool like this at the time, I think that I would have probably gone for what might have impacted people even more. And I remember really struggling to write that book. It was hard for me to organize things. Even with all of my experience, I had trouble with the order, and it just took me a really long time to do. And I've often thought back on that experience and thought, that was actually a very difficult writing experience for me. And I wish that I had had something available that would have shown me what was truly in that talk that I might have pulled out and used in an even more profound way. So, of course, like I said, I know that there are pluses and minuses to AI. I do feel, though, that as they are right now, these tools can be incredibly helpful to us in showing us what we are actually saying, without any sort of filter saying, oh, I shouldn't tell Mary this, but, there's none of that going on. So what happens then after this? Well, let me go back to my screen here. And what I am going to tell this to do, it says, if I were evaluating this as a ghost story, I say yes, because it's not okay. So it's telling me that it's a good idea. So now I basically need to decide which book idea I like. I'm going to just ask, which book idea do you think is the most compelling and why? I'm having a little chat with ChatGPT. You don't need more time. Interesting. Okay. Let's just go with that. I like that for purposes of this demonstration. Okay. It's telling me some reasons why. I like this. How to stop living a life of ones and twos and create more fours and fives. I don't really like that because it's a little bit too obscure. I might say the surprisingly simple way to make more progress by doing more of what matters. I kind of like that subtitle. Let's see. And then it reminds me that this book is about permission, not about time management, essentially. Actually, this would work well because of the book that I just did recently called It's Not Too Late to Want Everything. This would be a nice follow-up. I could even put it as a series with that book. So let's go with that. I'm now going to take a prompt, and I'm going to say, can you help me break it into, let me copy this and I'll paste it so you can see it. Can you help me break it into a possible outline for a nonfiction mini book of 8,000, 12,000 words? I'd like the outline to have a clear introduction, 5 to 7 chapters and a conclusion. Please suggest a working title for each chapter and a 1-sentence description of what each chapter covers. Keep the structure close to the order of the transcript. Reorganize it where it makes sense. Now, this is the line I really want to point out to you. Please keep the voice, tone, and vocabulary as close to the original as possible. This is where a lot of people get into trouble with these tools, is that they aren't strict enough about having the tool stay very, very, very close to their transcript. So if I could put flashing lights around this part, I would, because this is really crucial. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say, I like the idea of, what was the title it gave me? You don't need more time. With a subtitle that does not emphasize that ones and twos, exercise. All right. So let's see what it comes back with. Interesting. One thing I noticed when I reread the transcript is the workshop naturally falls into 3 acts: the illusion, the discovery, the choice. That's a satisfying arc for a mini book. Now, that's a really interesting thing that it pointed out there. And that is something that you can take with you after this talk. If you don't have something to work with yet, because you don't have a 60 to 90-minute recording of yourself, think about that as a possibility. What is the illusion that people are living with? What is the discovery that you're bringing to them? And what is the choice that they have to make at the end of it? That is kind of genius. Thank you, ChatGPT, for that. I may use that in some teaching coming up. So it has now given me a potential outline. So I'm going to look at this fairly closely. If I were doing this for real, I would spend a lot of time looking at this outline and making sure that it's exactly what I want and what sounds like me. So the first chapter, what do you really want this year? That's interesting. I personally would rather have it be more open-ended, or say, what do you really want for the next 12 months, something like that, because I don't want it to be like this year. Because what if somebody buys this book in November or December or something? So that's an adjustment I would make. Where is your life actually going? A simple exercise reveals the surprising gap between what you say matters and what fills your days. That's interesting. There is no have to. That sounds like me. Stop chasing time. Start following your energy. That sounds like me. Chapter 5, make room for what matters. I definitely remember talking about that in this training. Chapter 6, permission changes everything. That definitely sounds like me. One of my books is called You Have Permission. And then conclusion, your life is waiting. I think what I'm going to say on this is a good start, but I don't love chapter 1. How can we make it more, or say less timely in terms of this year? Let's just see what it says. Dates the book unnecessarily. Chapter 1, what do you really want? Before you can change how you spend your time, you need to become clear on what matters most to you and the life you're trying to create. Another option, a life worth making time for. Ooh, that's kind of nice. Most people fill their days before deciding what they actually want their lives to look like. And then it gives me a couple more options. Interesting. So again, for me, this is the most important part of this process, at least at this stage. You want to make sure that the outline that you are working with really feels right to you, really reflects your voice, reflects your ideas, and take time with this part. So if I were going to continue with this, I would really look at these options for chapter 1. I would either settle on one of these, or I would keep massaging this a little bit. And then let's see, it's talking about goals. What do you want your life to look like? And then it's giving me some ideas again for the subtitle. So I feel like at this stage, it's getting close, at least for this first chapter, to what I want. And I would again go through this exercise as often as I needed to in order to make sure that every chapter reflected what I wanted to do. So I want to show you one other piece of this equation here in terms of using ChatGPT. And I'm going to just say, I'm going to come back to the outline in a moment. Right now, I'd like you to try shaping part of the transcript into something that sounds more like a book. I'm pasting it here. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to start calibrating ChatGPT to my voice. Now, in fairness, I have to say that ChatGPT is already fairly familiar with my voice because I have put goodness knows how many pages of my own writing and transcripts into ChatGPT. But I want to just demonstrate this because this is an important piece for you to do if you are using the 1 hour mini book method. So I have pasted just a few paragraphs from the transcript. So let's see what it comes back with here. I think this is actually where the book can become better than the talk. I agree in most cases. And then it comes back with a draft of how it would change the wording of my transcript into something for a book. So it's this part right here that it's done for me. So what I would do next, if this were my real book, is I would go through this and say things like, I like the way this came out. I don't think this sounds like me. Or another thing that I often say is these are certain words that I never use. For example, I never use the word mindset. I don't often use adverbs in my writing. I tend to use strong action verbs and things like that. So I go through and again, I analyze what it has given back to me and I say, this sounds great. This doesn't sound like me. And this is the process of creating the book. And it's just that on repeat. Have it give you something, have it generate something, tell it where it's hitting the mark and where it's not, regenerate it, and just keep going. So obviously it would take me a long demonstration to go through the entire process. So I'm going to pause there and ask you if you have questions about anything that I have demonstrated so far and what are you seeing? Let me go ahead and stop the screen sharing here for a second. For me, this kind of tool has been so helpful because it has allowed me to create books for people in a way that doesn't cost $44,000 to be quite frank, and yet yields an incredible result. It results in a book that sounds like the author. AI is not the author. I am not the author. The person whose book it is the author. And whenever I have worked on these projects for people, they've often asked me, well, is the book going to sound like you, or is it going to sound like ChatGPT, or is it going to sound like so-and-so's book since you also did theirs? And every single time they've been thrilled to read a first draft and go, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound like anyone but me. It sounds like me. And this is the beauty of these tools. They have come far enough, at least at this point, to be used in a way that actually amplifies your voice. It doesn't have to stifle your voice. It can do just the opposite of that. And this process does not have to take a long time. It can be done relatively quickly, especially when you start becoming familiar and you start training the tool more. The more that you tell the tool what you like and don't like, the better each version sounds. So you're not having to do this in-depth critique on every single chapter. Usually I've found that by the third chapter, it's pretty good at knowing what I like and what I don't like, what sounds like me and what doesn't sound like me, or the person that I'm working with more likely as their ghostwriter. It's really important to me that every single person, and in my case, like I said, I work mostly with solopreneurs, so it's important to me that any solopreneur who wants to be the author of a book can be the author of a book one way or another, either by following this method that I've developed on their own or allowing me to assist them in doing that. Because it's not just a business tool. A book lives forever. My books will live on long after I'm not here. I can get kind of choked up about this. They have reached people around the world, people who I will never meet, but who I know have benefited from reading them. And there is nothing, literally nothing that I have done professionally in all my years of writing and all of the things that I've done. And I've done a lot of incredible projects in my lifetime of being a professional writer. But nothing has meant more to me than being the author of books, because there is something about a book that is tangible, even if it's an ebook, like most of mine are not in print. They are only ebooks. Some are print. There is nothing as tangible as that. It's a method of communicating with people that has been appreciated for as long as we can remember, basically. And it will go on being that way. I remember when ebooks first started to come out, and people thought that meant the death of books. And if anything, it's had the opposite effect. It's made it more and more possible for us to reach people and to deliver a message to them that is meaningful to you and to the reader. And goodness knows, at this point in time, we need more voices out there that are sharing messages of hope and important messages related to what you do in your work, which is so meaningful. And so I see myself as someone who can facilitate this. And it's why I am making it my sole focus going forward. When I look at these past 30 years, I can see that they've led me to this point where I have a way of helping people become authors. And it is so meaningful to me, just on a human level, to know that if someone buys my $3 book or whatever it is on Amazon and follows the steps, they can do it. I've had people write to me and say that it has worked for them. I also know that if I work with people in this way, their books get done and out there very quickly, and they have a great time and they get great results from them. So that's where I am coming from. If you would like to talk with me about your book idea, or if you're not sure if you have a book in you, there's a button here that you can click to have a free consult with me. Are you seeing the possibilities for yourself? If that's what you walk away with, then I have done my job. If you can see that it is possible for you to become the author of a short, powerful book that can impact your business, that can impact people's lives, that can change your life, because that's what the Joy Formula did for me. Ultimately, a year after I published that book, I had earned enough money to replace the salary that I was receiving from the ghostwriting business that I was working for before, the ghostwriting company. And I was able to move over here to my dream city of Paris, France. So when I say that many books can be powerful, I mean it. A small book, a short book, can change not only your business, but it can change your life.